Under the fading amber light of evening, the station creaked with the restless weight of those who were arriving and those who were leaving. Dust swirled beneath the boots of men saying their farewells, women clutching children close, and the tired whinny of horses tied up near the post gave the air a weary music. The train had just screamed its way out of town, leaving behind silence that pressed down like a heavy quilt. Jesse Callahan stood apart from the crowd, one boot set firm on the edge of the platform, his broad shoulders cutting a solitary figure against the horizon. 30 years had carved his body into a giant's shape, muscles thickened by years of ranch work, yet his face carried the unmistakable weight of emptiness. The land had made him wealthy, cattle had given him coin, but the long nights had hollowed something inside him. His black hat shaded eyes that scanned the departing train with a hunger he could not name, watching families embrace, strangers carried away to new lives. Every season had brought him more land, more stock, but no arms to meet him at the station, no laughter to warm his halls. A man can be rich and yet starve in ways that silver could never touch. It was then he noticed her, stepping into view as the last streaks of daylight stretched thin across the wooden planks. She moved with the weariness of someone carrying grief in her shoulders, a young woman who looked as though each step cost her something unseen. Lila Redbird, the townsfolk would whisper later. A widow at 23, her husband gone in a border skirmish no one cared to recall. Her dress was plain, worn threadbare, and she held a small bag as if it contained the last fragments of her soul. Beauty still clung to her, but it was the kind worn down by storms, not celebrated by easy lives. Jesse's breath caught, though he told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. The whispers had already spread about her, carried sharp and unkind through the streets of the town. Some muttered she was a burden, a woman without a place. Others, with colder eyes, said she was untouchable, stained by both loss and heritage. Half-blood they called her, though Jesse had always thought it a cruel measurement of humanity, like weighing a soul against the prejudice of men. Yet here she was, walking softly to the station master's window, her voice too low to carry. Jesse didn't need to hear the words to know what she asked. Cheap shelter, perhaps work. He saw the man's shake of the head, the way his mouth twisted with indifference, sending her back into the night with nothing but the dust under her boots. Something in Jesse clenched then, the way a man's hand might curl before a fight. He felt kinship he could not explain, two outcasts though painted by different brushes. He was rich but unloved, she was beautiful but unwanted. He took a step forward, then stopped, words choking in his throat. Would his voice sound like mercy or worse, ownership? The air was still, the sun sliding behind the plains when Jesse finally crossed the platform. Dust rose in little clouds around his boots, his silence carrying a strange gravity. She noticed him before he spoke, her body tensing like a deer sensing the draw of a rifle. He stopped a pace from her, broad hat pulled low, voice steady yet strangely vulnerable. "I need a wife." Her eyes widened, sharp with disbelief. She turned slightly, as though the absurdity of the moment might be a trick of the wind. "And what makes you think I need a husband?" Her voice was guarded, but beneath it lay exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that could make even hard words tremble. "I don't know that you do," Jesse said, his tone plain, unembellished. "But I reckon you need shelter." "I have both shelter and need." The words hung heavy between them. She studied him then, her gaze sharp as a blade, searching his face for mockery, for pity, for the cruelty she had learned to expect. "Is it pity then? You see me, alone, and think I'm something to be saved?" He shook his head, slow and certain. "No. I see you standing. That ain't pity. That's strength. Strength I'd rather not watch wasted." The murmurs began to rise, a tide of scandal from the few who lingered near the station. A white rancher, one of the wealthiest men in the county, proposing to a native widow in the open air? Tongues sharpened, eyes narrowed, and Jesse felt the weight of their judgment pressing down. Yet he stood as if the murmurs were nothing but the rustle of prairie grass. Lila's hand gripped the strap of her bag tighter, her breath unsteady. Finally, she whispered, her voice low enough that only he heard. "If I say yes, do I lose myself?" The question struck Jesse like a sudden crack of thunder. He had no answer ready, no clever retort. For the first time in years, he felt fear not of rejection, but of what it meant to ask something of another human soul. Her decision came not in words but in a nod, a subtle bow of her head that carried both resignation and defiance. Not love, not trust, but survival. Together they left the station, two figures mounted on horses that carried them away from the whispers, into the long sweep of prairie dusk. The sky bruised into purples and grays, the silence between them heavier than words. He shifted his saddle blanket toward her when the wind bit sharp, and though she did not thank him, her eyes flicked once, taking note. The road wound along a river, its surface silver under the moon's first rise. When her horse balked at the crossing, Jessie dismounted without a word, steadying the animal with hands gentler than she expected. Patience in a man of his size unsettled her, for she had braced herself for hardness, command, perhaps even cruelty. Instead, there was only quiet steadiness. She wondered, as they rode on, if safety could sometimes be more dangerous than suffering. The ranch loomed vast, fences stretching like skeletal lines against the night. The first nights under his roof were awkward, silence filling every room like an unwelcome guest. Jessie made no claim, asked for nothing beyond her presence. He moved through his days as though she were a shadow beside him, and yet, slowly, the shape of their silence began to change. Gossip in town sharpened like knives. Men sneered that Jessie had bought himself a widow, women whispered she was a curse. But the prairie winds carried such words far, and under their roof, something quieter grew. One evening, as rain hammered the tin roof, Jessie asked about her husband. Her voice cracked as she answered, "He died with no one to bury him proper." For a long moment Jessie said nothing, then murmured, "Come spring, we'll ride. We'll place a stone." She studied him then, suspicion warring with something softer. Gentleness from men had always come with a cost. Why not from him? In the days that followed, small acts grew root. She sewed a patch on his coat. He built her a garden bed. Neither said thank you, but silence between them shifted from cold to shared. And yet, when night fell, doubts returned. One evening, her whisper cracked the quiet. "Do you ever feel like you were meant to be forgotten?" Jessie's jaw tightened, and though he didn't answer, his hand lingered against the window frame as though bracing against the weight of that truth. The trial of their fragile bond came at the Sunday service. The church smelled of wood oil and hymnals, voices low in prayer when a drunk rancher staggered to his feet. His words cut through the air like a whip. "Callahan married a squaw." Laughter rippled, cruel and sharp, and Lila lowered her gaze, shame burning hot. Jessie rose then, not with fists, but with a stillness that silenced even the laughter. His voice carried, low and thunderous, "Call her what you will. But she bears my name, my house, and my respect. And that's more than you've earned." The room fell silent, the weight of his words heavier than violence could have been. For the first time, Lila saw not a man offering pity, but one unashamed to stand beside her. Something inside her shifted, terrifying and tender. That night, she brought him bread she had baked, setting it before him as though it were an offering. He received it with the reverence of gold. Their hands brushed, nothing more, yet it felt like vows unspoken. Under the hush of prairie starlight, Lila found her voice. "I thought saying yes meant losing myself. But I see now I've been finding pieces I thought were gone." Jessie looked at her, his eyes darker than night but softer than she had ever seen. "Then maybe you weren't the only one in need of shelter." The fire burned low, their silhouettes close, the silence between them no longer heavy but alive, like soil rich with the promise of spring. Outside, the prairie wind whispered across the plains, carrying away the echoes of gossip and judgment. Inside, two souls who had once stood alone found themselves daring to stand together. Years later, the story would be told in quieter tones. People still whispered, as they always would, but whispers faded faster than love. Jesse and Lila rooted themselves deep into the land, the ranch not just wealth but sanctuary. Her laughter returned, ringing bright against the walls. His loneliness dissolved, replaced by the steady rhythm of shared life. They had not built from pity or possession, but from the fragile courage of two broken people choosing to hold and be held against the wind. And if you ever find yourself at life's station, weary with no roof above you, remember this. Sometimes the boldest shelter is found in another's heart. Sometimes the richest men are only those who choose to love, and be loved, beneath the endless sky.